on to the next of my favorite directors, it's Wes Anderson, a director who is known for his distinctive visual style and symmetrical frame composition, and his movies are just really colorful and usually really bright with a feeling of a heightened sense of reality in his movies, and he always has an ironic and sarcastic sense of humor, and his movies just feel like pages ripped out of a storybook. That's how his movies feel like. So let's talk about his first movie, Bottle Rocket. Bottle Rocket is, I think, a very promising first movie from Wes Anderson, even if it doesn't exactly have what you would come to expect from his directing style. His directing style hasn't fully developed yet. I think it's until the third or fourth movie when you really see his directing style kind of come into shape. But in this movie, there's still a lot to love here, particularly the performances by Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson. The Wilson brothers are collaborators with Wes Anderson, so I think they really understand his style more than anyone else, especially at this point in his career. So to work with them, I think it really works really well, and I think there's a great chemistry between the director and the actors. Also, this has some of the funniest jokes ever in a Wes Anderson movie. This is a hilarious movie, I think, with a lot of very funny jokes, especially the high scene in particular is incredibly funny in my opinion. The next Wes Anderson movie is Rushmore, which is unfortunately one of my least favorite of his. The biggest problem with this movie is just how unlikable the characters are. Not just the main character played by Jason Schwartzman, but also the supporting character played by Bill Murray. Both of them are incredibly unlikable, and there's very little characters in this movie that the audience could actually root for. But this movie is special because it's a semi-autobiographical account of the personal lives of Wes Anderson as well as Owen Wilson when they were students in high school or middle school, whatever. And this movie is based on their lives, so it has a kind of a biographical feel to it, and it really gives you the opportunity to delve deeper into what's going on in Wes Anderson's mind and in his life. But this character is just really unlikable. If this character really is how Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson was when they were students, then it's totally fine. Okay, maybe they are just very unlikable people. I don't know them personally. Maybe they really are jerks, although I find it highly unlikely. But maybe they are. But still, the fictionalized version of them should at least have some kind of redeeming value that the audience could supposedly engage themselves to, because it's really hard to root for a character who just keeps making bad choices again and again and again. Even though the performances by Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman are really good, the movie ultimately is just a very mean-spirited and a generally unlikable movie. The third movie is when I think Wes Anderson really hit his stride, and the third movie is The Royal Tenenbaums. This movie is Wes Anderson's breakthrough film, and I think for the longest time this was also his best film. But I think after the release of The Grand Budapest Hotel, which we will talk about later, I think this movie is no longer his best. But I also think Moonrise Kingdom is also better than Royal Tenenbaums. So there are really two movies at this point in time that has really exceeded the quality of the Royal Tenenbaums. But I still think the Royal Tenenbaums is a very important movie because this is the movie that put Wes Anderson on the map, that made him a director to look out for. And there's good reason for that, because this movie has a really great balance of both emotion and genuine, raw darkness in its characters, and there's a lot of reality in a lot of the situations in this movie. But then there's also the fantasy side of it. It also looks fantastical and it looks colorful and everything pops. It has a feeling of fantasy to it that is a kind of usual in a lot of Wes Anderson movies. And in this movie you get the best of both worlds. Both the reality of it and the fantasy of it come together in such a way that is just so masterful in what I think is one of the best scripts that was ever written by Wes Anderson. Also, his directing in this movie is fantastic too. I think he has really grown from the first two movies, and really set his own directing style. It's very refined in this movie. It will only be more refined as time goes on, but I think this is where it all really began. Not to mention the great cast. This movie has an amazing cast. Ben Stiller, Gwyneth Paltrow, Gene Hackman, Bill Murray. Just such a great cast in this movie, and I think that the performances in this movie is also part of the reason why it's so fondly remembered. And I think even to this day, this is still a very important movie in both Wes Anderson's career and also just in the whole film circle as a whole. The fourth film made by Wes Anderson is The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, which was co-written with Noah Baumbach. Now I don't know, maybe it has to do with Noah Baumbach, but this film has a lot of very genuine dialogue that isn't actually that regular in a Wes Anderson movie. Most of his movies are cold and detached because of the fantasy elements in those movies. But this movie has a very special, genuine feeling. It feels very raw, something that probably Noah Baumbach would do. And it kind of makes sense that he is a co-writer of this thing. But besides that, I think this movie has some of the best production design in a Wes Anderson movie yet. This whole movie, or at least 80% of it, takes place on this one boat. And that boat looks amazing. But even in all those scenes where they are not on the boat, it still looks really amazing. And there's a lot of really great shots in this movie. The production design, the costume, the makeup and effects. This is when his art direction really started going wild. I think starting from this movie, his art direction really took it up a notch. But Cate Blanchett in this movie is an actress that I really want to point out, because you have all of Wes Anderson's normal collaborators here. You have Bill Murray and you have Anjelica Huston. But Cate Blanchett, when you add her into the formula, it just becomes so much better, honestly. Because Cate Blanchett is just so likable in this movie and so unique and so full of attitude in this movie. And there's a lot of different quirky characters in this movie that I think are some of the best characters in any Wes Anderson movie. But my favorite has to be this one guy with a guitar who keeps on singing David Bowie, but in another language. And it makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't do anything for the movie, but it's there and it's awesome. But the thing about The Life Aquatic is that it's also not very accessible to newcomers. This is very much a movie that is made for the fans of Wes Anderson. So anyone else looking for a traditional storyline might want to look elsewhere. This movie doesn't really have a story. You're just hanging out with these characters, and at times the movie can feel slow because of that. But I think those are just minor flaws compared to the amazing set design and production and the amazing cast in this movie. And I think ultimately the movie does overcome the problem of the pacing in this movie, which is quite slow. The next film made by Wes Anderson is The Darjeeling Limited. This movie has a great feeling of being on a journey, because you're being on a journey with these three characters and you really feel like you're part of them on this really long journey. And in India in this movie has a great sense of location as well. You really feel like you're there with these characters and the city feels alive. But not a lot of people actually put this up on their favorite Wes Anderson movies list. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just a very easygoing movie. It's a lightweight movie. It's not particularly meaningful or anything. It doesn't throw something subversive. It doesn't try to change anything. It's just a very solid Wes Anderson movie with good chemistry throughout the three brothers in this movie. Owen Wilson, Adrien Brody. I really liked the three brothers in this movie. I thought their chemistry was very good. Their performances were good. But overall, this is a very solid Wes Anderson movie. It may not be as unique as the last four movies or all of the other movies that he has made. This might just be his most generic movie yet. But even Wes Anderson at his most generic is still very unique. The next movie that Wes Anderson did was The Fantastic Mr. Fox, his first foray into animation. And Wes Anderson and animation, these two things just come together really well, because Wes Anderson employs type of technique. It's like a stop motion-esque type of animation that works very well to his style because his characters are cold and detached. And nothing screams cold and detached more than stop motion animation. But stop motion is also really beautiful because you could see them. It's practical. You could see like the fur on the animals, and the fur looks like the stuff that you touch in real life. They feel tangible. That's something that stop motion can do that other forms of animation can't. And Wes Anderson fully utilizes every bit of stop motion that he could to create a very beautiful animated film. The animation in this movie is just as beautiful as any of Wes Anderson's live action films, and in certain moments even more beautiful than those. And this is a movie that you definitely want to watch, even if it's just for the animation alone, because I don't think any of the characters here are really the main point of the movie. It's really just the animation and the way everything looks in this world. It just looks so unique. And this movie might just win an Academy Award that year for Best Animated Picture if Up wasn't released. But then there was Up. The next movie that Wes Anderson did was Moonrise Kingdom, which in my opinion is his most romantic movie yet. The movie is filled with this really beautiful romantic moments between these two young characters who are deeply and madly in love. And love is not something that comes to mind when you talk about Wes Anderson, but Moonrise Kingdom is a happy exception. This movie is just so romantic from beginning to end. And I can't believe I'm saying this about a Wes Anderson movie, but it actually is. And for any of those romance fans out there who love this type of stuff, this might just be your entry point to Wes Anderson's movies. But also, this movie has a lot of great set design, and I feel like I'm repeating myself by now, but this is just how Wes Anderson movies are. They have beautiful set design, beautiful costumes, beautiful makeup, and the color schemes in this movie and everything just looks wonderful, and it sounds wonderful, a great soundtrack as well. But Moonrise Kingdom also has something else. It has a great sense of location as well, because the movie is set in this island in the 1960s, and everything just looks unique. It doesn't necessarily look like something from the 1960s, because this is a Wes Anderson movie. It doesn't look like it comes from any time whatsoever. The next movie that Wes Anderson did was The Grand Budapest Hotel. Now this is the movie that I was dying to talk about. This is my favorite Wes Anderson movie. Moonrise Kingdom is my second favorite. Really close, but not there yet. Grand Budapest is also kind of his first movie where there's actually a consistent script. Like the characters are actually being driven by the story. This is the first time in a Wes Anderson movie where the story actually matters. And the story is hard to explain, but it does lead to a lot of very exciting scenes and set pieces. There are chase sequences, there are sequences full of suspense, and every time you turn your head, the movie changes to another genre, and it changes to another style. Its style keeps changing, and it's honestly very impressive. And the way the characters talk in Grand Budapest is very elegant. Now the dialogue in a lot of Wes Anderson movies are very elegant and articulate. Even in movies like Moonrise Kingdom, where the main characters are kids, the kids still act like adults. But in this movie, the dialogue is particularly elegant. It's just so good. It feels like something that comes out from a 19th century Gothic novel or something. And the whole movie takes a lot of different influences from different things, and the result is a movie that is so strikingly original that you won't really find anything else like that. Also, a big problem with a lot of Wes Anderson movies are the pacing of the movie, that the movie can feel slow at times. I never felt that Grand Budapest was ever slow. I was entertained by this movie from beginning to end, and it's just so exciting and unpredictable, and you never know where the story is exactly going. This movie still has a lot of emotion, it still has a lot of heart to it, and the performances here, especially by the two main characters in this movie, Ralph Fiennes and the other guy who I don't really remember his name, I'm gonna put his face there. Yeah, those two guys have great chemistry, and their performances in this movie are awesome. Even though all of Wes Anderson's movies have great production design, great costume, and the art branch of their movies are often really good, especially ever since the Royal Tenenbaums. But even then, I think with the Grand Budapest Hotel, Wes Anderson still managed to exceed himself in terms of the art direction in this movie. And his latest movie is Isle of Dogs. Now, I don't really feel anything special about this movie. It's still a very good Wes Anderson movie. I just don't think it stands out the same way as his other movies do. It's still beautifully animated, and this is a stop motion film, so I think that there's a lot of effort put into making a lot of these figures that they would usually use in stop motion animation. And I like the way the dogs look, I like the way the world looks, but all of that is expected to a Wes Anderson movie. So what does this movie bring differently to the table? I don't think it actually does anything that different, and that may be the biggest problem this movie has. So those are all of his movies ever made, and I'm looking forward to The French Dispatch.